Hey, my friends, welcome back to another session of Standing Strong for Marriage. This is a YouTube channel dedicated to helping people walk through marriage separation or divorce using Christian principles. Really trying to hope to see a lot of restored marriages, so do a lot of stuff about that as well. Today, I just am going to take a quick tour of some things about marriage. What's going on? I'm always thinking of Billy Graham, or at least tonight I am, when he said that his advice was to, in one hand, make sure we keep an eye on the scriptures so we know what God's thinking and all of that. And then, on the other hand, keep an eye on the newspaper. Know what's going on in our culture, what the issues of the day are, what's trending, what's not. So, I'm just going to look at some different articles. I'm going to go a little bit smaller here. And we're going to look at this article. Isn't this a nice little photo to start us off with? I like it. Check out this title, though. This cracked me up. Commitment-phobic men are the real reason women are having children later. So I think we're all aware of some of the trends about delayed motherhood. Mary Wakefield from The Spectator in the UK, she thinks that it's basically because of men and that we're commitment phobic. But check these stats out. Anyway, little man shaming to start us off with, but no harm, no foul, we'll be fine. No worries, fellas. Hang in there. We're becoming a nation of older mothers. That's apparently what's going on. The average age at which a woman has her first child is now 30, and a fifth of women reach 45 years of age without having a baby. She goes on to talk about her experience. She eventually had a son, but had to do some therapy and some different things, and she just said, man, wasn't so great. But we go on down here, and she says, I hate to kick men when they're down, but she suspects that the real problem isn't the ignorant girls, but the unwilling boys. She basically claims that women are pretty well aware of the advantages of having children before the age of 30, but there's a lot of talk about this, right? She says, no, it's not the student debt. It's not just the, women are trying to get in careers and focusing on that. She doesn't buy it. She says it's because of men and our kind of unwillingness to get married. Hey, and that could be totally true, I mean, I've covered things like this MGTOW movement, how a lot of guys are just saying, oof, it's too rough in the courts. If this thing goes sideways, it's just too much of a financial disaster. It's too much stress. It's too much trauma. Some people, they summarize it as, hey, if you were going to go skydiving and the chute only opens 50% of the time, would you still do it? Honestly, it's nothing to joke around about. I mean, there are a lot of people when they say get zeroed out, it's like a guy works his whole life to achieve this thing, and he knows that he could probably rebuild, but he looks at the number of years that it would take and the amount of effort, depending upon the damage that's been done to him in a divorce or with alimony payments and all these different things, depending on how many assets he lost, if he also lost his career and things like that. It's like, yeah, it's real. So definitely not advocating throwing in the towel. You guys hang in there. God does love us, and it is a lot of work to rebuild, but I think it's worth it. We're definitely strong, and think of how many people we can minister to, how many people we relate with. Well, if you didn't notice, in 2018, David's Bridal filed for bankruptcy, or at least bankruptcy protection. They had taken on a lot of debt when they were bought out by a PE firm in 2012, private equity firm. Private equity firms, they just kind of cut off a lot of the fat of a business. They look at the profitable segments. They borrow a lot and try to grow those profitable segments, and then basically have an exit strategy where they try to unload it to a seller or whatever. So that's what happened to David's Bridal in 2012. The PE firm bought them. Anyways, things are just changing, right? Things are obviously changing. I don't know why this didn't load, but it's fine. In 2019, then it kind of emerged from the ashes, but as you can see, downgraded. So it did take a toll on their business. Essentially, some other articles from CNBC said that they're basically trying to upgrade their online strategy. Hey, man. Whatever. And they're trying to focus on There's just supply chain trying to keep up with the times. But obviously, I think it's a $2.4 million bridal industry, and they say that they're involved in 1 out of every 3 marriages in the States. So still a pretty big company, but to see them kind of go down, and they even said that they're still affected by the declining marriage rates. Let's look at this. This is actually from reputable Pew Research Center. 8 facts about love and marriage. This is we're looking at the States. It says that basically half of Americans aged 18 or older were married in 2017, a share that has remained relatively stable in recent years but is down 8 percentage points since 1990. One factor driving this change is that Americans are staying single longer. The median age first marriage has reached its highest point on record, 30 years for men and 28 years for women in 2018, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. As the U.S. marriage rate has declined, divorce rates have increased among older Americans. In 2015, for every 1,000 married adults aged 50 or older, 10 had divorced, up from only 5 in 1990. Ugh. Among those 65 and older, the divorce rate roughly tripled since 1990. Really weird, right? It doesn't seem like people typically get divorced like at that late stage in life. But number 2, love tops the list of Americans' reasons to marry. Love, followed by making lifelong commitment. Let's see if we can zoom in on this a little bit for you guys. Companionship, having children, relationship recognized in a religious ceremony. Oof. Financial stability, yeah, I don't know. And for legal rights and benefits. Interesting. Apparently one of the things this other article said, are we going to, yeah, we'll look at it here in a second, about how married people pay a lot of taxes, are typically more productive in work, and so that's like a economic incentive for marriage, and why these trends are troubling to politicians. In a follow-up video, I'm going to really look at some political answers. I was so shocked at how all these governments in developed nations are basically throwing tons and tons of money. They've come up with all these different strategies and ideas about how to get their citizens to have children. People don't want to have children. So really interesting stuff coming up, but I'm probably going to do that in a different one. Shared interest keeps people married, satisfying sexual relationships. And I think that's really interesting in light of the no-sex marriage epidemic. Honestly, and I really found that like people do not take 1 Corinthians 7 seriously, where as married people we're charged to, attend to the sexual needs of our spouse. But it's not, it's kind of like a suggestion in church. It's like if you ask people, is this a sin? They'll be like, no, not really. Come on, like, I'm sure there's some reason. More than half, 56%, also named sharing household chores. Ooh. Hit them in the L spot is what I read one time, in the laundry. make sure you get the laundry done. Number of U.S. adults cohabitating with partner is on the rise. Really interesting. Fair enough. This is large majorities of Generation Zers, Millennials, Gen Xers, and Baby Boomers say couples living together without being married doesn't make a difference for our society. According to 2019 Pew Research Center report, 54% of those in the silent generation say cohabitation doesn't make a difference in society. About 4 in 10, 41%, say it's a bad thing, compared with much smaller shares among younger generations. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Remarriage is on the rise. And this is a really interesting thing. We can see this in Christian culture for sure. I mean, I just did this really difficult video on once saved, always saved, trying to understand this situation where, since there's all these Christian verses about remarriage being adultery, how's the church going to deal with it? What should we think? How should we think about that? But remarriage is on the rise. 23% of married people had been married before. One of the earliest videos I did, if my memory serves me correctly, first marriages fail, according to the study I saw, 46% of the time. Second marriages, it's definitely in the 60s. Third marriages, definitely in the 70s. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but for sure I can get it in the blocks of 10. So 40% for first marriages, some 46 or something, 60, like 3, I'm going to just say, for second marriages and in divorce, and then like 70 for third marriages. So what is this? So 60% of marriages are first marriages for both. Remarriage for at least one of the two people happens 40% of the time, and it's split right down the middle. Sometimes, half the time, it's both people are getting into their second marriage or subsequent remarriage, and the other half of the time, it's just one of those that had never been married before. Remarriage is more common among men than women. There's some interesting stuff about that. People say that essentially women, if they wait and get divorced when they're older and they're not as like attractive, or if they're kind of past their childbearing years, then for a lot of guys, you know, they're going to look for somebody that's either like more sexually attractive, or, you know, if guys are looking for children, then I haven't really looked much into this like freezing of the eggs thing, so I don't really know anything about that, to be quite honest, other than it's a thing. 1 in 6 newlyweds, 17% were married to someone of a different ethnic race. Race or ethnicity, what's the difference? Support for legalization of same-sex marriage has grown in the past 10 years. Millennials and Generation Z have been at the vanguard of changing views on same-sex marriage. Number 8, sizable minorities of married people are members of different religious groups. Oh, but people don't really marry across political party lines. That's really interesting. I would not have guessed that. Always learning something. This is really interesting, but I want to save it till the end. Let's go check out this source, Charisma News. It's a Christian site that has like ads galore. Pat Fagan ran this article, 7 Negative Impacts of Marriage's Decline. And it's nothing really all that surprising given it's a Christian journal. But it was interesting. It opens with a CNN journalist interviewed Kent State University students about marriage. While heterosexual students, both male and female, all looked forward to getting married, the interview highlighted their limited understanding of the impact of marriage that it has on their own lives and on society. Thus, despite their own intentions, they seemed unsure of the importance of it basically in the future. So it was a little on further down. It says, given that none of the students talked about abstaining from sexual intercourse, multiple configurations of the family, for example, single-parent families, families with non-married, cohabitating parents, etc., will be the natural result. Therefore, both adults and children in all of these different forms of the family will do more poorly in all of the many outcomes measured. On the other hand, married adults and their children do best. There is no avoiding this in the aggregate. So we'll see this a lot. We've seen it a lot in the past, but the aggregate data really seems to show that kids do best with their biological mother and biological father living in the same house. being successful in marriage. There's no doubt about it. We'll look at some things coming up just as far as how many people are poor. There's a pretty big difference, like poverty related to marriage. Maybe it's not causal, maybe it's the other way around, but they just talk about the normal stuff, really. The effects on the economy. Oh, I like this. There will be slower continued growth rate for the economy, which has already happened because of the high rate of breakdown of marriages already in place. We will have less money to go into the tax pool for the common good because married couples pay the most, and we'll have far fewer of them. There will be less capital formation because of the lower productivity and wages, and less saving. Married couples save the most. There will be a diminishment of services and industries that flow from the birth of children. Everything from diapers, clothes, homes, carpeting, and teachers for elementary classes, high school and college. There will be less house building as baby boomers age and die off but have fewer marrieds bidding for their homes. Yep. Effect on education just says that, kids don't do well when the family's broken. Crime, they just said that the most interesting thing I've seen about this is when you're talking about blended families and when you have, teenage kids that are not related to each other living in the same house, but then they're becoming sexually active, and just, think about that. It's a big concern for a lot of parents when thinking about going that way. Health concerns, STDs, of course, with multiple partners and all that, but also some things about higher levels of depression, anxiety, more obesity, substance abuse, addiction, etc., etc. Religious practice, they just say that basically you can expect a retreat from married sexuality will result in less religious practice. I think people just feel judged, right? I definitely feel like that. I never expected that it was hard for married or divorced people to go to church. It really is. Like, it's not, and I know we're not the only group, but it's like not a cool culture to be part of if you're married. You definitely feel like you're second class, or who knows. And I can understand people, maybe they see us as a threat, if we're doing well, we have all this time to stay in shape, we have energy, we're excited. We're definitely marriage material, and if we're growing in the Lord and doing the right things, people are maybe going to feel threatened. Anyways, this was the other thing. Marriage is a school of giving, but 54% of our teenagers today have biological parents who never married or are no longer living together. 54%. I didn't know that. When I was doing this research, this was the first time, and like I said, I'll leave the link for the next video, but the first time that I heard that actually children can do worse if they're living in a family situation where it's not their biological mom and dad. I never heard that before. It's pretty interesting. It came from this group called the Manpower Demonstration Research Corporation, which is now called the MDRC. But they're an interesting group. They're kind of a think tank about what to do with public funds, how to help poor people related to family and all these different metrics. So we'll look at that maybe next time. But their like executive vice president said that, yeah, just because there's a mom and a father, like a mother and a father in the home, doesn't mean it's always good. It needs to be, it says it can be worse.